with us on our panel. Patricia Stephens Due is here with us tonight. Thank you very much. Henry Steele as well. Thank you for coming. Dr. John Due is here. Dan Harmerling, and then Tanana Reeve Due is with us as well. Thank you all for coming, and it's going to be a great panel. We've got a lot of community leaders here tonight. I wanted to recognize my colleagues. The county's real proud to be part of this. We have been working on this for 5 years. We've done this, engaging citizens, asking hard questions, breaking down barriers. I'd also like to thank the staff at Leon County, and we just got an award. And frankly, these are the people doing a lot of the work putting this together. We just got recognized last night by the Florida Association of Counties in the first award of Counties Helping Counties, and it had to do with not only during the hurricanes, a lot of the counties step up, but our county has basically taken the Florida Association of Counties and explained to them how does a county work, and it really has been a great experience for them. So we were given an award last night, and thank you to the staff for all the work they did that. So Village Square has a number of different things going with projects like Race to the Movies, the book club on race, and Local Color, all of which keep on this topic of race relations. We started the Created Equal program in 2015 to host a frank conversation on race, and it continues to grow every year. We live in a world with racial, social, and religious discrimination. We continue to see progress, and we continue to seek progress, and we're never going to be done. Tonight, we'll come face to face with our own community history, which was pretty difficult, and some of the stories of the people that were there. I'm proud to live in a community that promotes diversity, awareness, multiculturalism, and live in a community which our leaders are not afraid to talk about tough issues. We look forward to the stories tonight that will be shared, and for each of you to share your own. Thank you for coming out tonight. Is Commissioner Proctor in the room? I will assume not by that. Okay, we've got some proclamations we would like to read for some of our attendees tonight. Commissioner Dozier, would you like to do the honors there?
I'm going to bring up Commissioner Minor. Cruz and Dr. Let me look at this real quick. All right. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you, Mr. Chair. There are times when a proclamation can seem rather formal. We have a bunch of whereas clauses, but it is the way we as a community recognize in a memorial way forever the contributions of certain individuals or groups to our community. So Commissioner Minor, our Vice Chair, and I are going to read this proclamation, and it is in honor of Patricia Stephens, Priscilla Stephens, and Dr. Reverend Henry Steele. To begin.
Whereas 60 years ago today, on February 13th, 1960, Florida A&M University student Patricia Stephens, her sister Priscilla Stephens, high school student Henry Steele, and 7 other students sat down at the whites-only Woolworth lunch counter in downtown Tallahassee to order lunch. And
whereas these young leaders represented the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, founded by an interracial group of students, and joined in common cause to use nonviolent means to advance racial equity. And
whereas, a week later, they sat down and were arrested at the same lunch counter with Florida A&M University students John and Barbara Broxton, Angela Nance, Clement Carney, and William Larkins. And
whereas these brave individuals refused to post bail, spending 49 days in jail to draw attention to the cause, a courageous, self-sacrificing act that became our country's first jail-in. And
whereas these young leaders became known as foot soldiers for their cause, and their actions are commemorated for posterity with footsteps at the Tallahassee-Leon County Civil Rights Heritage Walk. And
whereas civil rights leaders from across the country were inspired by these students and supported their cause, including the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who recognized these students for their courage and willingness to suffer and sacrifice for the cause of freedom.
And whereas, as part of the Club of Honest Citizens series, Leon County, with the Village Square, will host the 5th annual Created Equal 60th anniversary of Tallahassee-Leon County sit-ins to commemorate the historic events that took place in 1960 and ask the question, are we sitting together now?
Now therefore be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Leon County, Florida, that we recognize and honor Patricia Stephens, Priscilla Stephens, and Dr. Reverend Henry Steele, and observe February 13th as Created Equal Day, the day we honor these student leaders and their incredible sacrifice, and is dated today and signed by all the county commissioners and the county administrator. Thank you all. Good?
Yep, I think we're good. Okay, Matt. Royal and Liza, it's your show. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I also want to acknowledge that Congressman Al Lawson sent a proclamation for these heroes as well, too. So thank you for that.
I would like to introduce the Village Square's Board Chair, Bill Maddox, our facilitator for the evening. Bill served a decade ago on the Tallahassee-Leon County Civil Rights Heritage Sidewalk Committee, honoring the legacy of these civil rights foot soldiers. Thank you.
Thank you. In 1960, John F. Kennedy took America by storm, becoming the youngest man ever to win the presidency. Soon thereafter, he named his brother Robert to be our nation's Attorney General, and together they helped change the world. In that same year, 1960, two sisters from Florida, Patricia and Priscilla Stephens, burst onto the scene in Tallahassee, Florida. Through the local chapter of the Congress on Racial Equality, which they co-founded, the Stephens sisters and other students and allies turned our county upside down. They made history fighting racial injustice. The story of the two Stephens sisters from Florida is far less well known than the story of those two Kennedy brothers from Massachusetts, but it needs to be told and retold and celebrated. Tonight we're gathered to pay tribute to these two sisters, to honor the courage that they and others displayed on the streets of our city, and to marvel at the wisdom and skill that they showed in winning over people to their cause. Sadly, the spunky spark plug behind this whole story, Patricia Stephens Due, is no longer with us. But we are joined tonight and honored to have with us a number of members of her family, including her sister, her husband, her daughter, Tana Nariv, as well as other members of the family. And we're going to have a panel discussion now that will include them, along with Henry Steele and a young man named Dan Harmeling, who participated in some of these protests. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to the different members of our panel. As I mentioned, Patricia's sister and partner in crime was Priscilla Stephens Crozier. She shared a bed with Patricia for 7 weeks when they staged the first jail-in, along with several of their comrades here in Tallahassee after being arrested at a Woolworths downtown for sitting at a whites-only lunch counter. Also joining us is Patricia's daughter, Tana Nariv. She is an award-winning author who teaches at UCLA, and she and her late mother, Patricia Stephens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. And we have copies of this book in our lobby, and we would encourage you to pick up a copy. It's an excellent memoir. Also, we have, in addition to these two members of the Stephens Due family, we also have John Due, attorney John Due, who came to Tallahassee to get involved in these protests and to study law at Florida A&M. He, of course, met Patricia while here. They married and enjoyed a long marriage until her passing a few years back. And Dr. Due helped to pioneer the tactic of moving civil rights cases to federal court so that his clients would not be at the mercy of biased state courts. Finally, to start our conversation, and we'll have Dan join us in just a little bit, but finally we'll also have, as you know, the Reverend Dr. Henry Marion Steele. Dr. Steele is the son, one of the sons, of the legendary C.K. Steele, after whom our bus terminal is named. He was, of course, in many ways the Martin Luther King Jr. of our city, who helped to spearhead the bus boycott back in the late 1950s. And Henry participated in many of these protests himself, though he was a mere 16-year-old high school student, ended up being arrested along with the others. So this is how we will begin our panel discussion now, and please join me in welcoming each of these members to our stage.
All right. Freedom.
So we have a series of photographs that you can see on the slides there that we want to work through that will help to tell this story. Okay, we now have a mic that I can take with me, so this is great. The first photograph, and I'm going to join them on the seated over here, but the first photograph is one from a meeting that took place in Miami in 1959 that preceded all of the events that we're celebrating tonight. And this is a meeting of the CORE group, Congress on Racial Equality in Miami, and Priscilla and Patricia are pictured in this along with some other members of CORE. And so my initial question really is for you, Patricia, and that is,
Priscilla,
help us to understand what CORE was all about, what your philosophy was, what you were seeking to do and to change, and what took place at these training sessions.
Wow, that's a lot.
you get a check.
It was a wonderful time with CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. My sister and I were asked to go out for dinner, and we decided that we would go to CORE. And they told us that we have to be very, to do all kinds of things, and we didn't think that we could do it, but it was a wonderful experience anyway. In CORE. This is in Tallahassee. No, this is in Miami.
In Miami,
yes,
yeah.
Yes.
And one of the things that you'll note is that there are, in the photograph, people both white and black, and this was a kind of founding principle of CORE, was it not? That
Yes.
all chapters would be biracial so that you could work together in cooperation.
Yes, absolutely.
And we'll see and meet some CORE members in just a minute. All right, so Tana and Nariv, I know you participated with your mom in this writing of the memoir and got to know this story well. I'm curious to know kind of what struck you about her and at this time in her life, and just kind of as you think of her, what words, if folks here have never met her, what words would you use to describe your mother?
Well, courageous, very courageous. She didn't, when she believed in something, she did not know fear. Highly ethical. There's that voice of ethics in my head that still rings from my mother because she was highly ethical. And really, she loved horror. I'll tell you that. Most people don't know that. But she loved horror movies, and it sounds like a trivial thing, but I really think she used horror as a way to leach out some of the trauma of what she suffered, having tear gas thrown into her eyes, so she wore dark glasses. The fear of being subjected to arrest and potential violence, and I know my aunt was subjected to violence. So yeah, there's that. And at that time, when I see those pictures when they were so young, one of the things that I think about, Aunt Priscilla, is that you two, like you said, you were just trying to get a free dinner. You didn't know you were about to go become a part of a civil rights organization and nonviolent direct action protest, but once they heard the presentations and they got trainings on how not to resist arrest, they did replications of arrest, didn't they, at that workshop, Aunt Priscilla? Where you would pretend that the police were trying to take you away and you go limp and all these kinds of trainings, and they were really just like any other college students. And that's the thing that really stands out to me, is they were two fun-loving sisters having a great time at school, and then the civil rights movement ran into them. Once they had a means to create change, they had no choice but to become a part of the movement. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
So this next photograph is one that is really quite typical in that it's a picture of Priscilla carrying a sign that says, "We do not believe in violence." There's a gentleman who is protesting with you from your group that also has a sign with the same name. And one of the things that's really striking as you look at a lot of these historical photographs from these protests is that this was a very common sign that said, "We do not believe in violence, we're not here to fight." Help us understand why you made such a point of kind of bending over backwards to convey to people that this was a nonviolent effort.
I'm trying to remember some of the names, but I just can't remember all the names, but we did talk about about differences there. We talked about that. And we knew that we were going to be like other people. We wanted everybody to be like each other. We were very good about that. And we were going to be sure that we were going to do it no matter what. And that's what we did.
And this, of course, wasn't unique to the local core chapter. This was common throughout the civil rights movement. Dr. Due, help us understand why you made such a point of this. Rather than resorting to attempts to intimidate people or to bully people, you instead relied, it seems, on persuasion and trying to win people over. Yes?
Yes, well, as you know, this was in 1960 when the sit-ins began. And already the philosophy of nonviolence was beginning to emerge, like in India, in Ghana, what have you. And in relation to me, I was a law student at Indiana University, Knight College in Indianapolis in 1960, Priscilla. And even before then, I was motivated that I wanted to be a lawyer. But in law school, I didn't think they were teaching the right law. Is anybody here from FAMU here?
Sure, maybe.
Well, anyway, I was having trouble in law school because I began to understand that law is determined by the power structure. And when Priscilla and Patricia as students began to organize on the theory of nonviolence as practiced in Ghana and in India. That's when I became interested. I might want to come to Florida A&M Law School. Dr. Gore at that time was the president of Florida A&M, and he knew my mother, who was in Indiana, and they were students from FAMU attending the law school, so they were trying to encourage me to transfer to Florida A&M. And when I saw a picture of Patricia in Jet magazine, I'm still here. Did I answer your question?
Oh, that answered it quite well. Senator Reeve, you want to add to this?
Well, I just remember a lot of conversations with Mom, particularly about the nonviolence piece and the strategy and strategizing that was so exciting about CORE, because it gave you a methodology, right? So before you do a protest, you go in, you try to negotiate with the diner or with the store owner to avoid even embarrassment. Never mind violence. We're not trying to bring you embarrassment. We just want change. And then if that didn't work, then you would go in and do a nonviolent direct action protest. And it was very well planned. You had white students who would go in first and sit down. Correct me if I'm wrong, Aunt Priscilla. And then the black students would come and sit beside them, almost to say, hey, look, see, we can all sit together and the world doesn't come to an end. And then invariably, when the police came, there was a protocol for that. So it was a strategy. My mom used to, I don't think she was joking maybe when she said that she wasn't maybe by nature nonviolent, but it was definitely a strategy because from a practical standpoint, obviously you will turn public opinion against you, and also you're just outnumbered. So there are several reasons not to be violent in the protests and way more reasons to be nonviolent.
Done. That's excellent. All right, so we're here today because 60 years ago on this very day, this incident that we see photographed here took place. This is Patricia Stephens seated next to Charles K. Steele Jr. This is your brother. So this just kind of runs in the family, yeah, Henry?
Well, I guess you might say that.
So these two students decided that, how much older was Charles Jr. than you?
Charles was only 14 months older than I.
Okay. So he and Patricia have a seat at the Woolworths.
Well, actually, there's more than just the two of
right.
them. Yeah.
So they go, they sit down, and then what happens?
Well, it was, I guess, customary that a waiter or waitress would come and ask if they could help you. And you might say you might want a slice of pie, Coke, whatever. And very sternly, we were turned away. So we don't serve niggas in here. And that was the usual response in all of the lunch counters and sit-ins that I was involved in.
Okay, so my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong on this because I know you were involved with the memoir. The first gathering on the 13th, they dispersed the group, they closed down the counter, there are no arrests. But lo and behold, a week later, when they come back, we see this. Here's Patricia Stephens, along with a number of others who got arrested that day. They were initially released, but had to then come back to go to court.
Yeah.
And once they had their court case, they then decided, rather than to post bail, they would do what?
Stay in jail.
Stay in jail.
Right. Well, you were there, and Aunt Priscilla too. Speak to why not just pay the fine? Why go to jail?
No, because we didn't want to do that. We wanted to stay in jail. We stayed many times in jail too, because we were not going to give them our money. No.
Right. They weren't going to pay for discrimination. And you were very young when you got arrested. You were 16.
Correct. I was 16. And we had decided previously, before the sit-ins, each time we would have a meeting or a gathering or workshop the night before our sit-ins. And we had already decided that we were going to jail. Because in the previous sit-ins, when we were arrested and jailed, were not necessarily the first ones. The first ones, they closed down the counter. City authorities came and asked us to leave. We did not leave. They arrested us. And that typically seemed to be the case in our arrest. But others, we decided when the officers would come and ask us to leave, we would leave. But those times, there came a time when we felt going to jail was the thing to do, rather than pay money for our freedom. We are going to serve.
And this is what I mean when I said about the law. If the law is anti-human, if the law is anti-human, it's not the law. So why should you obey a law that's not a real law? That's what Priscilla, Patricia, and all the other young people, and Dr. King, who also taught the same philosophy dealing with nonviolence.
I just might say that nonviolence, love and nonviolence, was very basic to everything that we did. We did it in the way of love, in the style of love, for the purpose of love. And nonviolence was a part of it, because as not only CORE but other organizations, most of them had a Christian base. And love and nonviolence, very basic in the Christian faith. And that was just, I guess we just took that up naturally because it was, we talked about it, discussed it, had workshops and institutes about nonviolence, about love in all that we do.
Yes.
Even in our fights.
Yes.
So this is a perfect segue to introduce, of course, your father, who's pictured here. And I guess there are two things that have always struck me about this story that I'm interested in having you react to, Henry. The first is just that you had young women that were in leadership of these organizations. I mean, mind you, this is not just early civil rights movement. This is before women's liberation movement, and yet, much like we had seen with the bus boycott, where we had Carrie Patterson and Wilhelmina Jakes taking a prominent role, here we have Patricia and Priscilla Stephens taking prominent roles. That has always been of interest to me. But the other thing that's interesting, and this is what I want you to comment on, is that students were so prominent. And we know your father was highly involved in pushing for change, and yet virtually all of the people that were arrested were students, not middle-aged parishioners at your father's church or other churches. Help us understand why that was and what the strategic thinking behind it was.
Actually, it is not unusual that black women take leadership roles, but throughout the movement, and for example, in the black movement, you got Harriet Tubman, one of the most revered and known leaders or abolitionists in our history, a woman, black woman. And we've had several black women in positions of leadership and in the movement. Actually, the students were more involved than many of the older people, the seniors, mature people. The grown-ups or grown-ups had their jobs, their families, their children, all of those things come into play when you go out to participate in these activities. activities.
I think we need to
Without the
yes.
students, though, as my dad said, there would have been no movement in Tallahassee because they led the boycott or initiated it, and they did also with the sit-ins.
You know, the role of the woman was critical in the civil rights movement, critical in the freedom movement, and it goes back to slavery, where the male has been demasculated, and the woman had to assert herself to be involved in her family. And therefore, this became a cultural tradition within the black community of the woman assuming a leadership role. You need to, I see General Nelson here from Jefferson County. He's very religious. And in the Bible, there's in the book of Judges, there's Deborah. Anybody remember Deborah in the book of Judges? And guess who she was supported by? What's his name? Barak. So the black community has a tradition of a woman assuming leadership roles, and particularly this had a great impact upon Priscilla and Patricia because of their mother, who was, she was a Powell, but she was married to a man by the name of Hamilton from Atlanta, right? And in Atlanta, the African-American woman was very involved in the Atlanta politics, like Grace Hamilton, who ran for a legislature. So it's been a tradition of black women assuming a role in leadership in the black community because of how they demasculated the black male during slavery.
The next question I want to ask is related to this, because part of the reason, Priscilla, you guys went and refused to post bail, remained in jail, wasn't simply to deprive the county of money, but also to call national attention to your cause. And what is striking about this, the photograph that you see there is of an invitation that Eleanor Roosevelt sent out after learning of your story to invite people to a fundraising dinner to raise money for CORE, at which she had Priscilla and Patricia come and speak. And we also saw a telegram from Martin Luther King, and Jackie Robinson sent journals so that you guys could write about your experiences in jail. And so you really did get a lot of attention to your cause. I'm curious to know if there are any memories from that, of going to New York or other things that stand out as you recall some of the attention that you guys got.
The World's Fair.
When you were touring with Mom and Mother.
Well, first of all, we talked about love. That's what we did a lot. But before Dr. King and in our churches, we talked about that. That's how we did in the churches. And we had to be nonviolent with everybody. And our mother wanted us to we just wanted to do right all the time. We did things very early in first grade, 6th grade. We went to the setting about how to go. Sometimes I can't say it, but I wanted to go to the ice cream place, and my sister and I went every time to the stage, and we went to the white stage, and we paid, and they gave us the money. And so when we went with other friends, they refused to do that. So then we wanted to start a voice star. We started doing that in the old days. So we started very early, my sister and I, how we were going to do things when we were 8th grade or 9th grade. So we were busy all the time. My brother was there too. We were just very busy doing things. And we tried to do things for other people. We always did that, tried to be a difference, to make a difference. And we're still trying to do a difference. I don't know what our people are going to do now, because I see so many things now. People are not doing anything. Our people are doing really, really, really very bad things. And I've lived to be 81. I can't believe it.
Please.
But when we tried to make a difference with people, we did it all the time, and we tried to make a difference with people, and people are still not making a difference. I don't know why. People are still evil. There's so much evilness still now. I don't know why, but it is. But we try to be a difference, as we didn't want to be something against other people. We want other people to be wonderful, to be loving. That's what I'm still trying to do. But it's so many problems still.
Well, Priscilla, when you look at this room, the first thing I can think is I see such a direct impact that you had and Mom had and all of you up here have had on just this community. For a gathering of this size to be so interested in that history, that isn't true everywhere. I think Tallahassee is special in that way because there has been that impact, and people are going to pick up that baton. So don't you worry about that. People are going to pick up that baton.
Thank you.
Just to follow up in terms of the touring, I know Priscilla and Mom give great credit to my grandmother, Lottie Sears Houston, and their stepfather. We call them Daddy Marion Hamilton, who taught them intellectually that they are equal.
Yeah.
But when you started getting arrested, they were very worried, and they wrote letters. Your stepfather was afraid he was going to lose his teaching job. I think he did get reassigned from his teaching job. So they were fearful, but by the time they saw the worldwide impact you were having, you were getting letters from all over the world. Jackie Robinson published Mom's column in New York. They understood that you were really making a difference, didn't they? They started to get less afraid.
Yeah, well, we still are. We're trying to make a difference, but it's not enough. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's still not enough.
Well, there were plenty of people in Leon County that paid attention in those early days, and there were people from other parts of the state who did. And I'm now privileged to introduce to you all someone who was down in Gainesville at the time, a young student at the University of Florida named Dan Harmeling.
Who is he?
And he came up. He's going to join us now.
Where is he?
Dan came up after learning of all this, have a seat down here, and after learning about all these protests, came and made his way to Tallahassee and took part in a protest that took place in front of the Florida Theater, movie theater, where you can see a large group of mostly FAMU students, including Patricia there out front. So I guess I'm just curious to know, got arrested as part of this? I'm curious to know what motivated you to come and what happened once you got here.
Well, first of all, I just want to say what a privilege it is to be here with everyone from Tallahassee. I know I'm from Gainesville, but don't hold that against me. I really don't care that much about football anyway. But what happened was the summer of 1963, before I went to Tallahassee, I was with another Florida student. Her name was Judith Benninger. Later married, became Judith Brown. Judith and I connected with a Florida A&M student, Betty Wright. Betty Wright had been up here been involved with Pat and connected with her and started a chapter in Dunellen called Dunellen Corps. A one-person movement in Dunellen. Very brave young woman. And in Ocala, there was an NAACP movement. And we went down there and we met her. Then we learned of somebody who was white, who had come from Corps. His name was Seb Eleni. And he was arrested in Dunellen. I just refreshed my memory of the story the other day. He was arrested on a charge as he picketed in Dunellen with the Corps students who were all black, young people from the community, of course, together with Betty Wright from Florida A&M. He was arrested on a charge of vagrancy. And I read the article. Zeb had $100 in his pocket at the time and was getting a regular subsistence salary from Corps of $25 a week, but he definitely was employed. He was, of course, put in the all-white male cell block and beaten severely, including a skull fracture. Once he got out, they protested it, but who came down from Tallahassee to protest? Patricia Stephens Due. Yes. So because we were connected with the NAACP and Corps with Betty Wright, we got to know Pat, and Pat said, wait a minute, when school starts at Florida A&M, I want you to see what's going on campus. And I want you to bring that story to us because there's a lot going on. So that's what happened. When we got arrested, we joined Pat in one of the demonstrations in front of the Florida Theater. They immediately rounded us up. And at the same time, that picture doesn't show us because all the whites who were initially on the picket line, there were 2 of us from the University of Florida and 5 from FSU. We were already in jail. Before the night was over, I want to let you know, and these were almost all, the rest were Florida A&M students, and some people, additionally from the black community, there were 348 people arrested that night. And that was early September, I think maybe the first week of September. So that's how I got involved, and I'll tell you, it was a life-changing experience. Obviously, there were things in my life that brought me to the point of wanting to be a part of the movement, and that all came through my involvement with a very progressive minister in Winter Park Methodist Church, families from Winter Park. His congregation didn't know it. He was a part of the Florida Civil Rights Commission. He was one of 2 white ministers in the state who joined with the NAACP to investigate racial atrocities, and his wife was a sponsor of our Methodist Youth Fellowship. And my twin brother, Jim, was the president, and I was also, of course, a part of that. And she had us go and meet with our fellow Methodists. Of course, we had to go to their church because our church was strictly segregated, and these were the youth from the Black Methodist Church. She did the same thing with Jewish young people, and we met at the synagogue. So all the seeds were planted, and when the summer of 1963 came, we were ready.
All right.
And it was just fantastic.
And I was our law student.
It's interesting that you mention the role of white churches in this, because I know from some of the folks that I've talked to who were involved at FSU, there was apparently a campus ministry known as the Church of the Resurrection, which I guess some called the Church of the Insurrection, that got involved in some of these protests alongside some of the FAMU students.
Okay.
I'm curious to know, you referenced going to jail. I'm curious to know, and anyone who wants to can jump on this. What were your experiences in jail like? How were you treated? What did you guys do to pass the time when you were there for 7 weeks?
Don't look at me, I'm a lawyer.
They didn't know. No, we went to jail. We sang. We did. I had to sing. I could sing, of course, in those times. And we played cards. And it was just, we were 4 girls, so we did things with each other, you know, and we ate a lot of food. They would feed us once a week, I think, once a week from the university. And so we ate every time. And we got fat. My sister and I, we were really fat. And but we didn't worry about that. We were not nervous about things. People came from the other side. The white girls came from outside, and we were not worried about that they would do something to us. They didn't bother. They didn't bother me. You know. So I just thought that I would live until I died. That's the way we did. We just, until we died, we will be there and do the best that we could every time. And it was dangerous. It was dangerous, but we were not scared from it.
I'm curious of your experiences here. You were in, what, 8 days as part of the jail in?
I was in 8 days. I was the youngest in the crowd. And when they decided to appeal the case, everybody voted me out because I was the youngest, which I didn't like very much because I was having a time.
Yeah.
I enjoyed my time in jail. Though I did get sick, they didn't have room enough for me. They didn't have a cot or bed for me. I had to sleep on the floor, the concrete floor with the thin mat, and caught a death of cold because where they had me stationed, I was right below a window that was open all the time.
Really?
And I got very sick, but Priscilla mentioned eating and getting fat. Not from jail food, I'm sure.
No, from the people from the
people
university.
of the community.
Yes.
Church people and all brought so much food.
Oh.
At that time, you could
Many.
take things to the jail for
Right,
inmates.
yes.
Now you can't do that. And so we had so many boxes of food.
Food, yeah.
And cigarettes and what have you. The jail would provide little boxes of tobacco, Prince Albert, cigarette, and papers. All right, I'll leave some for you. You should know. But we had so much, we fed the other prisoners. And I'm sure the keepers of the jail got their share. Fried chicken, whole cakes,
Yeah, and ice cream.
pound cakes. I don't know about the ice cream,
Yeah, they brought us ice cream.
but we shared everything.
ate a lot.
Everybody ate well while we
Yeah,
were in jail.
All right, now,
And the city really brought us some great food
They sure
and
did.
anything else that they would allow them to let us have. But we didn't necessarily depend on it, but we were glad to have it.
Fried chicken.
I remember my late mother talking about answering letters, Aunt Priscilla, because you were getting letters from people all over the world, so you spent some time answering letters. And even though you were prisoners, I don't know if you remember this, but by the time you were released, they gave you some time off. It was a 60-day sentence, but you got time off for good behavior, so
Yes,
you
you
only
did.
stayed 49 days. As you were leaving, is it true that one of the prison guards had brought his son
Yes,
and
I just told that
introduced?
story today.
Do you want to tell the story?
Yes. You know, the lady was called Miss Love. Can you believe that? And she knew we were leaving that day. And she brought her son, who was 7. I think he was maybe 12. I don't know how old he was. But anyway, she wanted him to see us. And she wanted us to know that we had done something good.
Yeah, remember them.
Yes.
Remember this, because
Yes.
this is history, is basically
Yes.
what she was saying.
I would like to find this child now, you know, because this is 60 years ago. But it was really, I wanted to tell you about the story of jail. My sister and I, well, we were 3 girls, and we lived in a very small cot, very small, but we were we were so nervous because the people would come inside of the cell. They could easily come inside from us. So my sister and I we sat with each other. I don't know the word, but anyway, we sat for 39 days each time in a cell. We could not sit in a cell by ourselves. We were too nervous. Yes, just the two of us. One day we would sit on one side of the cot, and the next go on the other side. That's how we would change it every day. So you'd fall coming out because we were big. We're not that big, but we'd fall over anyway. And then you'd inside. That's how we did it for 49 days.
49, yeah.
49 days. That's what we did. Yeah. For so
All right,
many
Dan,
days.
I'm curious, your experiences in jail sound a little bit different, perhaps, from some of these others. Tell us what happened to you once you got arrested.
Well, I think I sort of gave you some sense of what might happen when I told you the story about Zev Eleni, the white core male worker. He was down from Minnesota picketing with the Denellen people, and he was severely beaten. He was by himself. When I was arrested and we were put on trial and, of course, found very quickly guilty of whatever charge we were having at the Florida Theater at the time, there were three of us who were white males, myself, Stephen Jones, and Tom O'Neill, if I'm remembering those names right. As we came into the jail, these white prisoners in the open area, because they locked them up in their bunk cells, but during the day they're out where the tables are, and we were on the outside. They were about to put us in there, and we said, we're not going there. In fact, Stephen said, okay, guys, take off your ties, because they could choke us. So we knew right away that we had possibly a very vicious time ahead of us. So we said to the jailers, we're not going in there. We're not going in there. So they took us down this hallway, and it was dark, and they led us into what evidently these cells were what they called solitary confinement. So until we got, the ACLU was filing some habeas corpus things, and it took a while. So I think we were there about a total of 5 days. We were put in solitary confinement, completely dark cells. The only light we saw was at the end of the hall, so when they brought us food, which did not, by the way, come from the community, it came from the jail. The white community, maybe they didn't hear we were there, otherwise it would have been different. We know what those white men who were in jail wanted to do to us, but they would slide the plate through the slot in the cell door, and then, well, we really didn't know what was on the plate, so we'd hold the plate out and then catch the light on the plate so we could see what it was, and that's essentially what we had. I will tell you also, just another sidelight, when we were the next summer, some of us in Gainesville, total 7 males in all, went down to join Martin Luther King in St. Augustine. And when we were jailed there, the black prisoners, we could hear them singing freedom songs. So we started singing freedom songs. The sheriff came in, he was outraged. He said, I'm not putting up with this. You're going into the sweat box. And so for the next almost a week, we were in this little 5x5 container out with a metal shed, and books are written about this because they had to go to federal court afterwards, called the sweat box. There were 7 of us, and we'd actually slept in shifts. But one thing that happened was, when we got to St. Augustine, my twin brother and I were the third and fourth white, I always have to say white males, because obviously they were selecting us to be put in the white male jail. One of our young men, white, was training to be a Marine. And when we got into the cell, his name was Julian Brown.
Yeah.
Julian was not only doing hand push-ups, he was doing push-ups standing on his head. And anyone who's done that knows that you have to have, that's what he was doing. The white prisoners were not bothering him. And they didn't bother Jim and I. And later on, when when 3 professors joined us, so that's where the 7 of us wound up. They came the next day, and that's when our freedom songs got us put in the sweatbox. So, but anyway, that was about it. And stories like that. I was also arrested in Jacksonville. That's almost too horrible to tell you. That was not a pleasant experience in that jail. And then there was also Montgomery, Alabama during the Selma to Montgomery March. People don't know that in Montgomery there was so much going on. Everyone knew about the march. They didn't know that hundreds and hundreds of young people being arrested on the steps of the state capitol, picketing George Wallace to try to assert before him, right in front of his steps, that people had to have the right to vote. So,
All right.
All right, I've got time for just one last question. I want to ask it of you, Tanana Reeve. And that is, in this photograph, we see your mother once again with sunglasses, much like we saw at the outset with that lunch counter scene that's behind us. In the first one, I'm told she's wearing glasses as a fashion statement, but at some point, not just for that reason. Help us understand why she always wore sunglasses.
Yeah, this is an example of the literal physical trauma of the movement. A lot of people in the movement suffered emotional trauma and never got over it, just like soldiers at war. But she actually had this physical scar, which is that when, in 1960, after students had been arrested, she and Priscilla, you both organized a march through FAMU students, 1,000 FAMU students marching across the railroad tracks to protest to get the students released. A police officer recognized my mother as one of the student leaders. He pointed at her and said, "I want you," and he threw a tear gas canister in her face.
That's right. Yeah.
And from that time on, she always felt sensitive to light and wore dark glasses, mostly even indoors. So this was before I was born. I never knew a time when my mother wasn't wearing those dark glasses, which are currently, I believe, on display at the Florida Archives, at the museum. Those dark glasses, or at least they've asked to have them, so or will be soon if they're not already there, because they are an iconic sort of emblem, not just reminding us of who she was and what she looked like, but what she suffered and that lifelong toll she took as a result of a decision that they made when they were pretty much kids in the civil rights era.
Wait a minute.
Oh, Dad, you have a correction?
If you look at that picture, you see a brown-skinned man. I was doing what I'm doing now. I had my legal pad with me. I wasn't going to get arrested, but I'd take information down. You know, that's what lawyers do.
Well, we've come to the point in our program where we are going to draw this panel discussion to a close. Please join me in thanking each of them and giving honor to them.
That's right. I still have my legal pad.
And then I want the panelists to remain seated for just a moment, because we've got some other folks in the audience who we want to recognize, who played significant roles in their own way in different civil rights activities. And so Eliza is now going to recognize some of those folks.
So real quick, before we do that, I want to acknowledge Leon County Commissioner Jimbo Jackson, who's here with us. Jimbo. Also let you know that Commissioner Proctor was scheduled to be here tonight and really was looking forward to it, but he got sick and wanted to let you all know that he's here in spirit and he's here with us. Also wanted to recognize City Commissioner Elaine Bryant, who is
First, we'd like to ask members of the Due and Steele family in the audience to stand. Thank you. As we say
The next generation.
As we say your name, if you can stand and remain standing through the rest of the introductions, please do. If you can also hold your applause to the end, that would be nice. Dr. Larry Robinson, president of Florida A&M University, the alma mater of Patricia, Priscilla, and John. For the 50th anniversary of these events, FAMU publicly recreated the sit-ins and jail-in, and were instrumental through the efforts of the director of the Meek-Eaton Black Archives in having an historical marker placed at the North Florida Fairgrounds commemorating the activism of the students in 1963. And I believe we may have some FAMU student leaders in the house. If you will, please stand up. Larry White, Vice President of the Tallahassee NAACP, the nation's oldest civil rights organization and part of this history. While Tallahassee Corps launched the direct action strategies with the sit-in and jail-in, the NAACP trained activists and was instrumental in handling some of the court cases against those arrested. Dr. Maxine Jones, professor of history at Florida State University, co-author of African Americans in Florida, and principal author of a report on the Rosewood incident for the Florida legislature. Dr. Keith Parker, professor of sociology and criminal justice at Florida A&M University, specializing in African American studies and rural sociology. Dr. Linda Walden, grandniece of the late, great Jackie Robinson, who broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball. Also breaking a color barrier as the first black physician to open a practice in her hometown of, it's not pronounced Cairo, is it Cairo? Cairo, Georgia. And the first black chief of staff of Grady General Hospital. Brother and sister Fred and Dobby Flowers each broke a color barrier of their own. Fred as the first black baseball player at FSU, and Dobby as the first black homecoming queen. And Pulitzer Prize winning retired journalist from the Miami Herald, Bob Sanchez, who wrote about these events as a student journalist at FSU. Thank you.
Okay, so now it's time for you to get involved in the conversation. And so we've got some questions at each of your tables that you can explore together around the table. And we're going to give you some prompts to help you in your discussion that are built around some of the historical photographs from this era. This first photograph that you see is of one of the Corps members who has a sign that says, "Your cooperation can help us end racial segregation." And the questions we want you to wrestle with related to this are, how important is cross-racial cooperation today? Are there ideas that blacks can more easily advance than whites? Others that whites might be able to more easily advance than blacks? That will be a topic for discussion. Next question. In this, you'll see that the sign says, "Is white always right?" And the question we want you to wrestle with here is, do you think this sign would have been more effective if it had simply declared, "White isn't always right"? Why or why not? So is it better to ask questions or to make declarative statements at times? This next photograph is of Count Basie, the great jazz musician who came to Tallahassee, was denied the opportunity initially to play at a club near FSU, but eventually won the opportunity to do so. He returned and has the sign there that says, "All that we were asking was for equality and justice." Very simple propositions. And the question here is, do you think it's better to assume the best about those that you disagree with, or to assume the worst? Does a spirit of goodwill help foster racial understanding? Does a spirit of goodwill increase one's chances of being taken advantage of? Those are some questions for you to wrestle with surrounding that photograph. Here we have a picture of Priscilla confronting a young man who has run through the picket line, grabbed one of the signs, and tore it up. And the question, ironically, in front of her when this happened was Angelina Nance carrying a sign that said, "The golden rule is not practiced here." Kind of ironic when you think about it. But the question we want you to wrestle with here is, can you imagine yourself or someone else who shares your point of view ever trying to prevent people who disagree with you from proclaiming their message? How should we view deplatforming and cancel culture in our day? And finally, this is the biggest question of all, and that is, are we sitting together now? What, if anything, should we be doing to encourage greater interaction between people of different races and different perspectives? So those are some questions to get you started with conversation around the table. We hope and encourage you to have fruitful conversations, to be direct and honest and forthright, and then we'll have a time to compare notes in just a few minutes about some of the things that you discussed around the table. So we'll transition now to that, but again, one more time, please join me in thanking all of these members of our panel. Yes.
All right.
And please do pick up copies of the memoir on the way out, and Tanana Reed will be signing copies if you'd like.
Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights.
Can I add to your last question? We're in the 21st century now, and I have some grandchildren here. Jackson Due Willoughby, stand up please. And Giovanna Due Willoughby. Now, we talked about the civil rights movement of the 20th century. Now we're in the 21st century. What is their mission for the 21st century that's beyond civil rights? So I wish we begin to think about what are we going to ask our grandchildren what they need to do, because it's no longer the issue of sitting at a lunch counter or a movie theater, because they figured out finally they make money when they serve black folks. You know? It took a long time, but they figured it out. So what is the mission for my grandchildren? There's a song, Love All of Me, I want him to sing right now, but he ain't gonna do it. By John Legend, okay? The last stanza, not the first four stanzas, which is about his girlfriend, he's trying to, make out with. But the last stanza, all of me, needs to be the mission for the 21st century.
All right, great question to add to your list. That's a terrific one. Enjoy your time around the table. We'll reconvene in just a few minutes.
Just one thing to what Dr. Due said about that next generation. A part of tonight, we've got some young men that are from this community in the Omega Lamplighters who have been challenged to kind of lead that stroll, and they're going to come up and take a picture with these heroes, but we wanted you to be able to see them so that you could hold them accountable for what they've signed up for as being that next generation of kids in our community who are going to take the torch from these heroes, all right?